In the remote outskirts of White Hollow, a small town hidden by thick forests and rolling hills, stood the decaying remains of St. Elora's Orphanage. Established in 1894 by the stern and pious sister Margaret Elora, the orphanage was intended as a sanctuary for abandoned children. But over the decades, it became known among the locals as a place cursed by sorrow and death. The building itself was a grim sight. Its Gothic architecture loomed over the landscape, with shattered stained glass windows and ivy strangling the stone walls. The iron gates, once a symbol of protection, now stood permanently ajar, creaking with the slightest wind, as if beckoning anyone brave enough to enter. Locals avoided the place, especially after nightfall, convinced that the cries of the lost children could still be heard echoing through the forest. For years, St. Elora's was plagued by tragedy. According to town records, between 1905 and 1938, at least 12 children disappeared without a trace from the orphanage grounds. The head mistress at the time, Sister Margaret, always insisted they had simply run away. But whispers among the surviving children told a different story. One of those children, Evelyn Moore, now in her late 80s, gave a chilling account to a local historian before she passed away. She recalled that at night, the other orphans would speak of the Black Nun, a tall, shadowy figure that roamed the halls after midnight. Those who claimed to have seen her often vanished days later. Evelyn recounted her own encounter, which took place in the summer of 1937. One evening, after lights out, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps outside the dormitory door. She hid under her blanket, too terrified to move as the door creaked open. Through the small gap in the covers, she saw a figure dressed in black robes with a white veil, its face obscured by shadows. The figure stopped at the bed of her friend, Amelia, who had been sick for days. Without a sound, the figure lifted Amelia in its arms and carried her out of the room. Amelia was never seen again. The next morning, when Evelyn asked Sister Margaret where Amelia was, the headmistress simply replied, "She has gone to a better place." That phrase would become chillingly familiar to all the orphans as more children vanished in the same mysterious way. By the early 1940s, rumors of the disappearances reached the authorities, prompting an investigation. Inspectors combed the orphanage, but found no evidence of foul play. However, what they did find was deeply disturbing. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, they discovered a small, windowless room. Inside were remnants of toys, old clothes, and tiny scratches on the stone walls, as if someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. After the discovery, the orphanage was abruptly shut down. Sister Margaret Elora was never seen again. Some claimed she fled to Europe, while others believed she had taken her own life in the very basement where the horrors occurred. For decades, the building stood silent, slowly falling into ruin. But the stories never stopped. Hikers who ventured too close claimed to hear the faint sounds of children crying or singing nursery rhymes deep within the empty halls. A group of amateur ghost hunters who filmed a documentary there in 1998 captured unexplained footage. A shadowy figure crossing the main corridor, and the disembodied voice of a young girl whispering, "Help me." Perhaps the most terrifying account came from a man named Darren Holt in 2011. Darren, an urban explorer with a YouTube channel, decided to spend a night alone inside St. Elora's, equipped with cameras, audio recorders, and a flashlight. He entered the orphanage at dusk. For the first few hours, everything was uneventful. Aside from the eerie silence and the occasional sound of dripping water. But at exactly midnight, his footage captured something chilling. The camera, left stationary in the old dormitory, recorded the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway, followed by the faint singing of a lullaby. Darren, who was setting up equipment in another room, didn't hear it at the time. Later that night, Darren reported seeing a dark figure at the end of the hall, standing completely still. Thinking it was a trick of the light, he approached cautiously, but the figure disappeared before his eyes. Feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, he decided to cut his exploration short. When reviewing the footage days later, Darren was horrified to discover that, in several frames, the figure of a tall woman in black could be seen standing behind him, watching silently as he explored the orphanage. Darren never returned to St. Elora's, and shortly after posting the footage online, he deleted his entire channel without explanation. Friends claimed he became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn, convinced that something had followed him home. Today, St. Elora's orphanage remains abandoned, its once vibrant halls now silent and decayed. Some say the spirits of the forgotten children are still trapped within, endlessly searching for a way out. Others believe that the Black Nun still roams the corridors, forever guarding the dark secrets of the orphanage. Despite the numerous accounts and urban legends, the truth of what happened inside St. Elora's remains a chilling mystery. Perhaps it is better that way, for some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Hidden within the dense wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains stood the old Crestfield Orphanage, a grim structure surrounded by towering pines and veiled in a near-constant mist. Built in 1921 by a wealthy philanthropist named Jonathan Crestfield, the orphanage was intended as a place of refuge for children displaced by war and poverty. But over the years, it became infamous for the chilling rumors that surrounded it. From the very beginning, the isolation of the orphanage posed a problem. The nearest town, Ravens Peak, was over 20 miles away, accessible only by a narrow, winding road that was often blocked by snow or fallen trees. This remoteness gave the staff unchecked power, far from the prying eyes of the public or authorities. Former residents later described the place as cold and oppressive, ruled by headmaster Alistair Crane, a man known for his severe punishments and strange habits. According to several accounts, Crane would conduct late-night inspections of the children's dormitories, walking silently through the dark halls with nothing but an oil lantern. If a child was caught awake after curfew, they would be taken to the basement for correction. No one ever spoke of what happened there, but children who returned from the basement often refused to speak or eat for days. In the years leading up to 1975, several children went missing from Crestfield, though official records list them as having been relocated to foster homes. However, these claims were never verified, and their bodies were never found. The most notorious of these cases was that of Thomas Greaves, a 9-year-old boy who disappeared in 1972. His roommate, David Lorne, claimed that Thomas had been dragged out of bed one night by Headmaster Crane, screaming for help. The next morning, Thomas's bed was empty, and the staff insisted he had been adopted by a family in a distant state. David, however, remained unconvinced until his dying day, insisting that something far more sinister had occurred. The orphanage's reputation reached a breaking point in the winter of 1975, when a massive fire consumed much of the building. According to the official report, the fire was caused by faulty electrical wiring. However, survivors told a different story. One of the surviving orphans, then 14-year-old Lisa Corbin, later recounted the night of the fire in a series of interviews. She described waking up to the acrid smell of smoke and the sound of frantic screams echoing through the halls. But as she tried to escape, she was confronted by something far more terrifying than the flames. Lisa claimed that as she ran down the main staircase, she saw several dark, human-like figures moving through the smoke, seemingly unaffected by the heat or the collapsing structure. These figures, she said, were not staff members or other children, but something else entirely, something inhuman. She described them as tall, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. What horrified her most was that these shadowy entities appeared to be herded by none other than Headmaster Crane, who stood in the center of the foyer, arms outstretched, chanting in a language she could not understand. Lisa barely escaped the building through a broken window on the ground floor, suffering burns and a fractured leg in the process. When rescuers arrived, they found the orphanage almost completely destroyed. The bodies of 11 children and 3 staff members were recovered from the wreckage. Headmaster Crane's body was never found. In the aftermath of the fire, investigators uncovered several disturbing discoveries beneath the ruins. Hidden beneath the orphanage was an extensive network of tunnels and chambers that had never been included in the original building plans. Within these subterranean rooms, authorities found ritualistic symbols etched into the walls, along with remnants of burned candles, bones, and what appeared to be makeshift altars. Although the official explanation was that these were remnants from the building's early construction, or possibly misinterpretations of debris. Many locals believed otherwise. Rumors spread that Headmaster Crane had been involved in occult practices, using the orphanage's isolation to conduct rituals and sacrifices involving the children under his care. The surviving orphans were quietly relocated to other facilities, and the site of Crestfield Orphanage was left to decay. Over the years, nature slowly reclaimed the land, and the remaining stone walls became overgrown with ivy and moss. But despite the passage of time, the legends surrounding Crestfield only grew darker. In the late 1990s, a group of paranormal investigators known as the Black Lantern Society decided to explore the ruins of Crestfield for a documentary. Equipped with night vision cameras and EMF detectors, they ventured deep into the collapsed basement, eventually finding one of the hidden chambers beneath the structure. During their investigation, the team captured several pieces of chilling evidence. Most notably, they recorded an EVP, an electronic voice phenomenon, in which a child's voice can be faintly heard saying, "He's still here." Moments later, one of their cameras malfunctioned, and the team reported seeing a shadowy figure moving across the far wall of the chamber. Perhaps the most disturbing part of their visit occurred when one member, Ashley Monroe, was separated from the group for several minutes. When the others found her, she was standing in front of one of the old altars, completely still, staring at the wall. When they tried to lead her away, she became violent and began screaming in a guttural voice that did not sound like her own. The team ultimately had to carry her out of the ruins. Ashley later claimed to have no memory of the event, but reported experiencing recurring nightmares of being trapped underground, surrounded by faceless figures. Following the incident, the group abandoned their documentary and released only fragments of their footage online, sparking renewed interest and fear surrounding Crestfield Orphanage. To this day, hikers and explorers who venture near the ruins report strange occurrences. The sound of children laughing or crying in the distance, the sight of fleeting shadows among the trees, and an overwhelming sense of dread that compels them to turn back. Local legend holds that Headmaster Crane never died in the fire, but instead became one of the very shadows he once commanded, forever bound to the ruins of Crestfield. Others believe that the orphanage was merely a gateway to something far older and darker, awakened by years of suffering and death. Whatever the truth may be, one thing remains certain: the shadows of Crestfield Orphanage have never left. They linger in the silent ruins, in the cold mountain air, and perhaps even in the memories of those who dare to remember the horrors that unfolded there. Perched at the edge of the Blackthorn Marsh, where thick fog rises from the stagnant waters and the cries of unseen creatures echo through the night, stood the crumbling remains of Hollow Pines Orphanage. Established in 1908, the orphanage was intended as a sanctuary for children orphaned by the influenza pandemic that ravaged nearby towns. But over time, Hollow Pines earned a far darker reputation. The orphanage was named after the towering pine trees that surrounded it, their blackened trunks creating a natural barrier between the building and the rest of the world. The marsh, perpetually shrouded in mist, only added to the sense of isolation and dread that seemed to seep from the very earth itself. While Hollow Pines was active, the staff maintained a strict policy of silence in certain parts of the orphanage, particularly in the East Wing, known ominously among the children as the Silent Ward. Officially, this wing was used to house children who were ill or required special care. Unofficially, it was where the most disturbing incidents occurred. One of the earliest recorded tragedies took place in 1916, when 5 children assigned to the Silent Ward vanished overnight. No signs of forced entry or escape were ever found, and their beds were left neatly made, as if they had simply risen in unison and walked away. The head caretaker at the time, Sister Florence, claimed that the children had been adopted by families in other towns. But none of these supposed families were ever identified. Over the following decades, more disappearances followed the same unsettling pattern, always in the Silent Ward, always without a trace, and always without explanation. Staff turnover was frequent, with many caregivers refusing to work in the East Wing after experiencing strange occurrences. Objects moving on their own, whispered voices in empty rooms, and most disturbingly, the sight of pale, expressionless children standing at the end of the long, narrow hallway, only to vanish when approached. One of the most detailed accounts came from a former nurse, Margaret Ellis, who worked at Hollow Pines in the late 1940s. She described an experience that haunted her for the rest of her life. According to Margaret, during her night shift one winter evening, she was making rounds in the Silent Ward when she heard the distinct sound of children's laughter coming from room 12, a room that she knew had been unoccupied for months after the last disappearance. Thinking it was a prank, she entered the room only to find it empty. But as she turned to leave, she saw small handprints appear in the condensation on the window, as though someone invisible had pressed their palms against the glass from the inside. Terrified, Margaret ran from the ward, never to return. She resigned the following day. By the early 1960s, Hollow Pines had fallen into severe disrepair. Funding dwindled, and the once vibrant institution became a bleak, hollow shell. In 1967, after the unexplained disappearance of yet another child, 10-year-old Samuel Reed, authorities ordered the orphanage's closure. The remaining children were transferred to other facilities, and Hollow Pines was left to rot, consumed by the encroaching marsh and the relentless grip of time. But despite its abandonment, the stories did not stop. Locals spoke of strange lights flickering in the windows of the silent ward at night, even though the building had no electricity. Hikers who ventured too close to the property claimed to hear soft, melodic humming carried on the wind, along with the unmistakable sound of children playing. In 1983, a group of college students decided to explore Hollow Pines for a class project on local folklore. Armed with cameras and tape recorders, they ventured into the decrepit building one foggy evening, determined to document evidence of the paranormal. Among the group was Daniel Mercer, a psychology major who had always been skeptical of ghost stories. He led the team through the decaying main hall, past rusted furniture and walls warped by decades of moisture and neglect, until they reached the entrance to the silent ward. The door to the east wing was still intact, albeit swollen from humidity, and required considerable effort to push open. Inside, the air was thick and oppressive, heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and foul. As they proceeded down the corridor, their flashlights illuminated rows of empty rooms. Faded murals of smiling children adorned the walls, their colors long since muted by time and decay. The group decided to split up to cover more ground. Daniel and his friend Rachel entered room 12, the very room from Margaret Ellis's account, while the others explored further down the hall. Inside room 12, Daniel noted the oppressive silence. Even their footsteps seemed muffled, as though the room itself absorbed sound. Rachel set up a tape recorder on the windowsill, while Daniel took photographs of the peeling wallpaper and the broken bed frame. Suddenly, Rachel froze. On the dusty floor beside the bed were small footprints, as if left by barefoot children. But there was no disturbance in the thick layer of dust leading to or away from them. Then, faintly, they both heard it, the sound of children giggling softly, directly behind them. Daniel spun around, flashlight raised, but the room was empty. Yet, the laughter persisted, growing louder and more distorted, until it filled the room with an almost unbearable, static-like noise. Panic overtook them, and they fled down the hall, reuniting with the rest of the group. Together, they sprinted out of the orphanage and didn't stop running until they reached their car. Later, when reviewing the audio from the tape recorder, they discovered something even more disturbing. Layered beneath the static and laughter was a voice, low, guttural, and inhuman, whispering the words, stay. That was the last time any of them returned to Hollow Pines. Over the years, other explorers ventured into the ruins, many reporting similar experiences: fleeting shadows, phantom laughter, and the pervasive sensation of being watched. In 2010, an urban explorer named Kimberly Hayes live-streamed her solo exploration of Hollow Pines. During the broadcast, viewers reported seeing a figure standing at the far end of the silent ward hallway behind her, though Kimberly herself never reacted to it. Moments later, the video cut to black. Kimberly was later found outside the orphanage, unconscious but unharmed, with no memory of what had occurred. She has since refused all interviews and has withdrawn entirely from social media. Today, Hollow Pines Orphanage remains sealed off by the local government, deemed structurally unsound and dangerous. Yet, those who live near Blackthorn Marsh still report strange sights and sounds emanating from the decaying structure, especially on misty nights when the fog rolls thick and the pine trees creak under their own weight. The legend of the silent ward persists, a chilling reminder of the many children who once called Hollow Pines home, and of those who may never have truly left. Some say their laughter can still be heard on quiet nights, carried on the marsh winds that weave through the hollow pines, forever trapped in a place where silence was once demanded but never granted.